Днес продължаваме с следващия панел от онлайн семинара, който е на тема Документиране и регистриране на нематериалното културно наследство, където ще се разглеждат методи, законодателство и добри практики. Наш лектор днес ще бъде госпожа Панайота Andrianopoulou. Пожелавам ви една интересна сесия на всички нас. Панайота, заповядай.
Добър ден. And unfortunately, my Bulgarian stops here. Every time I am working with the regional center and I am among you, I am feeling so home, not only now that we are doing this webinar, but even when I am there. And every time I come back in Athens, I say, I will try to learn Bulgarian. And every time, a lot of things that are happening in our everyday and working life prevent me from doing so. Nevertheless, it will still be an ambition and a goal for me. Before stretching, many thanks to the Regional Center of Sofia for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage. I would like to greet also the 2 anniversaries of this year. Our convention that I know that you are already aware of, but you have been also in the very experienced hand of Hana Šrajber 2 days ago, and so you went once again through it, becomes 20 years old, still young but very popular. And the other one is our 10th anniversary as a regional, not only center, but cluster, because I think that the work carried out from the regional center can be a milestone for the whole work that we are carrying out in our institutions. As Iliana said beforehand, I am working now in the Ministry of Culture of Greece, in the Museum of Modern Greek Culture, which actually is the National Ethnological Museum, but it is named according the periodology of modern history, as it is described in our legal framework in Greece. So I have several hats on my head. The one is dealing with material culture, but mostly how we can express the immaterial and intangible, so to say, social relations of cultural phenomena designed as intangible cultural heritage through artifacts. And thus I am also here in order for you to ask how we can retaliate these 2 phenomenological, apparently different sides of culture, the material and the intangible, which are as a page, you can't actually disparate the one from the other, dispatch the one from the other. And the other hat is the one as a facilitator of the 2003 convention. I was trained in Sofia, so in a way I was born in Sofia as the person to give advice and to conduct workshops. And before starting sharing my screen in order to go through what is documentation, research, and inventorying through the convention, I would like to say that you can ask me whatever you want concerning what we are going to listen. Inevitably, there are going to be repetitions, not only with what you've heard from Hana the other day, but also with what you are going to hear the next days. But believe me, it is going to be for you maybe the best way to digest all this information. First, just to say that the 2003 Convention for the Safeguarding of the Intangible Cultural Heritage, it is not but just another instrument. Still, it changed our vision in how we deal with cultural heritage. It is not something freezed, it is not something sacred, it is not something that we have to keep as we had and to leave it like that to next generations, but we have to accept also transformation. And with that, I am coming to the beginning of this module. Hoping that everything is going to work nicely. I don't know if you are seeing my screen correctly. Iliana, can you possibly verify?
Yes, it's perfect.
In a full presentation, okay? Because for me, it's not.
Yes. 4 slides, yes.
That's what. Yes, that's what I'm trying to do actually, but doesn't seem that it worked this time.
The initial one is the title, documentation and registration.
Yes. The thing is that it seems that. Wait. Do you have the slightest idea which is the button on the clavier that can put it on full screen? Maybe it's F10. Here we are. Is it okay? Perfect.
Yes, perfect.
I decided to put a photo as a cover to start from actually a workshop organized in 2016 from the Regional Center of Sofia in Bucharest. And we are, at that time that you are seeing us here all, trying to make a practicum of documenting in a field, a very short field trip. It's an inventorying exercise. And I am sure that what you are going to listen, what we are going to have the time to listen, you are going to receive the whole, which is quite extensive concerning definitions, legal framework, and of course, methodology overview, especially the part 3, the methodological overview, includes a lot also a lot of technical details concerning how we can use different ways and methodologies of documenting. If ever we don't have enough time to go through everything, you are going to receive it, and I am grabbing the occasion here to repeat that it deserves the methodology of documenting, researching, and inventorying, or documenting, researching to an inventory, deserves a full, at least 5 days workshop with a pluridisciplinary team, meaning and wanting to say that we need also technicians for video making, for photo making, and hopefully the center is aware of that and is working on that direction. So, as we say here in Greece, let's name things and give the definitions to know who we have in front of us. More parenthesis again. It's a pity that we didn't have enough time for introduction of every one of you in order to create a more familiar atmosphere. But it is very happy and unusual for me to be among 48, 50 almost people. So it wouldn't have been easy, and it would have been time consuming. So every time either you type a question in the chat that I am going to consult all the time, please don't forget to write down from which institution you are, museum, NGO, citalista, and the same thing when you want to ask a question. And please feel free to note your questions as long as I am going through the PowerPoint. So, documentation, research, and inventorying intangible cultural heritage and for intangible cultural heritage. I don't know your profiles, as I said, but I'm sure that quite a lot of you have already conducted research activities, either as scholars or as members of your institutions, because when we are part of a dancing group and we are in a village trying to verify our dancing accuracy or trying to make choreographies, but according the way it was carried out, we've all of us, we've got across talking with what we called in the intangible cultural heritage, with bearers, with dancers, with elder people, with local teachers. So in a way, we have already conducted, knowing or not, some research. This is, if you want to say, and I'm going to the next slide, but I am going to come back to the previous one. It is as those wheels that the one works in total harmony with the others. The research, if you want, is the mother of everything. It produces, it gives us the data that we are organizing in documentation forms and ways, one of whose can be the inventory. So it goes beyond documentation, and sometimes it uses documentation. The convention and the operational directives refer to the idea of collecting data as part of safeguarding measures that institutions are encouraged to carry out. Here to say that the 2003 convention is not a compulsory instrument. I mean, once we've signed the convention, we are not compelled to do the things that are prescribed. We are invited or encouraged to do it. But as we say, it is an accordance between states, and we have to respect the general rights. So the research with regard to intangible cultural heritage is not a name per se. What I mean, it's not an academic research trying to go in depth in the interpretation, linking it with big theories, anthropological or cultural theories only, but aims at better understanding a given element of intangible cultural heritage, its history, its meanings, its aesthetic and artistic features, its functions, multiple functions, the practice, the transmission, the dynamic of being recreated. And it should be conducted systematically and progressively. It is required to provide data for the inventories. And in the case of intangible cultural heritage, it focuses on processes and not only on products. To give you an example, when we go to a village to research about the pottery traditions and the pottery production, we are not interested in the pottery itself, but in the ways it is transmitted, the techniques, in the techniques, but as a product of the way of life of people there. We are interested in what is woven around, which means eventually beliefs, songs, the symbols that are decorating the pottery. So mostly processes. It is interested, as we said, in transmission and viability. And it is a prerequisite for nominations. We are going to go through that also in the legal framework. But in order to go either towards the national inventory or to the lists of the convention, the representative, the urgent safeguarding especially, we have as a state to demonstrate that the element is inscribed in an inventory. Excuse me, here we are. We have, of course, different type of documentations. I will not insist because we are going to go through them further away. Now, we have to keep in mind that when we are talking about documentation for an intangible cultural element, I would like to ask if it is clear to everybody when we say intangible cultural element. You've heard probably about the big intangible cultural heritage domains that are described in the convention itself. So we are talking, I'm just going through that again: oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, a lot in our region, knowledge and practices that are linked with nature and universe. And here we are having a lot of traditional ways of cultivating the land and the soil or the transhumance, and a vast, a vast domain, which is the traditional craftsmanship. These are the basic domains. Though the convention doesn't say that we are just have to fit all our intangible cultural elements or folk culture in these 5 big categories. We are free to have more in an inventory, coming back soon. Still, we have to keep in mind that an ICH element, let's say a dance, is part of a larger cultural system. A dance is not there only as a dance, and we can't documentate it only as steps and choreography, but we also have to collect data about its history, its variations, the way it is transmitted, the circumstances in which it is enacted and practiced, its importance and significance in the community. What other elements, cultural elements, are linked and associated with a dance, such as song, music, stories, myths, legends, but also a lot of, how to say, tangible elements, such as costumes, such as musical instruments, such as the space itself and how it is organized, with tables, with chairs, and everything. And another thing that, and recall the wheels, the intangible cultural heritage elements that we are document are linked to each other. We can't just describe one part. One element can incorporate more than one activities. So we have songs that are sung during different occasions, that are danced, that are being recreated. Another thing is that documentation is an ongoing process. It is intended to describe and understand, and not to give the form that we have to observe every time. It can change because we have new people entering in the procedure. Documentation should be descriptive and not prescriptive. So we have not to fit what we see in our notional boxes, but to describe them and then to see if they fit, and has to be objective and perspective as much as we can, because every researcher that documents still is a person, still is an agent with its own glance, theoretical background, social origin, cultural identity, etc., etc. So objectivity still remains a big question, and something that we can't always guarantee. As I said, it's not the product, but the process in intangible cultural heritage. So it's not the basket, but the whole procedure, plus the use, plus the people that are working in the different stages of the procedure and in the different instances of the item. Because believe me, and you know it better than me, the final shot here, it is maybe not the final stage of the life of such a basket. It wouldn't be for me a shock if in the same village, in a small house, I see it as a decorative artifact, or in the city, I see it as a souvenir. So the process should include also the different uses and symbolic values. And as I said, the context. We have to contextualize every intangible cultural item that we are documenting. Its name, the practitioners that are enacting it, the reason, the reason and the one that it is addressed, the audience, the consumer, the place, the time. Actually, this consists the grid of the very basic interview, let's say, question-making procedure. What, by whom, why, for whom, when, and where. And of course, to accept variations and different versions, to verify with other voices in order to touch the maximum of diversity that is really asked and required in such kind of documentation. To keep in mind that we are talking about ownership, and this is a tricky word, because can we own an intangible cultural element, or we are enacting it, performing it, practicing it, transmitting it, but we are not possessing it. We document not to freeze and keep the authentic version. We are avoiding as much to categorize at first, because we are most of the times going to fall in what I've said you before, linkages and overlappings. And of course, when we talk about cultural phenomenon, folk culture in our case, we can't, as I said, dissociate the tangible from the intangible. The Bistrica Babi, for instance, what they would have been without their attire, and the dress, the attire, is crafted. what they would have been without the musical instruments. If we document, for instance, the spring carnivals that are common in our Southeastern European region, if we leave apart the masks, how we are going to talk about ritual practice? It is these masks that mark the ritual aspect. And of course, the space, as I've told you, that can be either a natural space, but chosen. Why? Because it is dressed with a lot of legends, or built, such as a monument or a place of worship. Something that in our academic research we are not really looking at, but in cases that we are interested as a topic of our research in the transmission mechanisms, is this training and transmission. Documentation has been carried out as a fruit of research from a lot of very important scholars in folklore and ethnology in our research, in our region. What I mean, the ethnography, because actually research means ethnography is the first step for research. Mainly in the Balkans, stressed its importance in describing what we've been seeing and trying to insert it into a glorious past, to demonstrate that it is an identity mark for us, either a spring festival or the pottery, as I've told you, all the symbolic value that we are still having during our participation in social practices is linked to our past, and in that way it is proved that we are linked to the big ancestors. We've left apart as scholars this extremely important feature of the folk culture, which is the transmission. When we say tradition, I don't know how it is translated in Bulgarian, but in Greek it means something that it is given to me to give. So I take something, I use it, or I am inserted to that, and I give it to next generations. After Second World War, the forms of transmission in our region changed a lot. And I say in our region because for the Western Europe, this has started long before. It has started from the beginning of the 19th century. We have museums over there, we have academies, whereas here we are in our Ottoman neighborhood. The Second World War marks this change towards, as we say, modernity. By that time, before that time, embroidery, dancing, different customs were not taught, were not instructed. Young generations were trained to that through completely natural ways, what we call now traditional methods. So the father learned to the son how to cultivate the soil, the mother learned to daughter how to knit, and slightly, when we all started moving either to urban centers or to live in an urban way, especially today, imagine that now we are not talking, you can't be remote anywhere. You can't be cut off Western civilization, Western way of life anywhere, because we have this thing. And if we don't have this thing, our mate in the village has this thing. So technology and urbanization marked a shift to the change of the transmission way through formal training ways. So now we are talking about training centers, school or institutions, whereas before, in order to learn how to make jewelries, you were meant to sit beside the copper maker and to learn by him, to learn by seeing, to learn by hearing, to learn by doing. This is an extremely important thing that we should documentate. How something is transmitted, in which ways, when the ways changed, and what are the ways of transmission every community invents to reinforce their mechanisms of keep being. And of course, that's why beside both the UNESCO as a general organization, but also our state countries that have ratified the convention, we are very interested in the viability of intangible cultural heritage. This is something also new in research for intangible cultural heritage. Actually, and I'm sure that you know it, beforehand, 20 years or 30 years before, when we were seeing that something was extincting, we were really charmed and attracted, and we were towards that as if we have found a very rare treasure. Now we are going towards it, but in a more distant way, either to help it if the community wants to be assisted to reactivate the tradition, or if the community wants to fail it out or to leave it fade out, we are just there to take witness, to give witness of what is happening and try to explain why. By saying that, I don't mean to discourage anybody from, discourage us all, from trying to revitalize or to save what is to be saved. But nevertheless, when something is extincted with the logic of the convention, it is not meant to be resurrected as Christ the very recent days of Easter. Coming now, after all those definitions, so we have research, a way of researching that derives to documentation data, and that can be the fruit for inventorying. Let's come now to the legal framework. I will basically stick to what the convention says about documentation and inventorying, because this is our topic besides. Nevertheless, it exists also other organizations that are there to give legal advice. We're going to go through it, but not in detail. So, as I said, the convention is inviting us to take general measures for safeguarding intangible cultural heritage in order to ensure the inviolability of the ICH, to preserve its values, and to promote it or revitalize what is in danger but not extincted. When we say general measures, we talk, as you can understand, about legal, administrative, and of course, financial measures. So legal, administrative, and financial support of communities and organizations such as the Citaliste or the NGOs in order to safeguard. Another general measure is to raise awareness, to learn. So what the regional center is doing now, actually, to learn about the legal framework, to learn about the notion of intangible cultural heritage, to learn about the new notions of heritage, and of course, to reinforce the participation of communities, of the people that are in the stewardship of the intangible cultural heritage. I would really like to ask you to give some examples of what you understand as safeguarding measures, but the regional center has carried out a preliminary research among you with a questionnaire, I think, and they were kind enough to let us know that more or less you are aware of what we mean by safeguarding measures, and you all included inventorying, all or most of you included inventorying and documentation among them. And of course, research, revitalization, but under condition, protection of places and materials, transmission, and raising awareness campaigns. All the above mentioned with the participation and consent of communities, groups, and in case given, individuals. I am mentioning here, and don't panic because you are going to receive the whole material, the specific articles where all the above mentioned are explicit. To show you the importance, the ongoing importance that inventories are having for the 2003 convention, I am going just to present you very, very quickly the new way of assessment system that initiated 5 years ago the General Organization of UNESCO in order to assess, but in a way also to see if state parties are working effectively for the safeguarding of intangible cultural heritage within their territory. As you see, it is a very complicated thing where things are interlinked. It has 8 big thematic areas. I am not going to go through them. No need to do so. You can be quite quiet that it is an official task to carry out, and it has been done for Europe last year, the reporting, and they had to keep all that in mind. But we see here that inventorying and research, I don't know if you can see my marker, inventorying and research is one of the big thematic areas where all the state parties have to report how they are doing. Why? Because the inventories should reflect the diversity of intangible cultural heritage and should be organized in order to contribute to the safeguarding, because inventorying process should be inclusive, should respect diversity, should support safeguarding by and for, I would add, communities and groups, because research and documentation should contribute to safeguarding, and because research findings are accessible and utilized. And those 5 should are organized in core indicators, and in furthermore assessment factors. Oh, so much complication to just mention that inventorying is a very important part of the 2003 convention. And you would come, of course, and ask me, okay, the convention regards that inventories is the way to document for safeguarding the intangible cultural elements, but how they assist me, how the convention can help us to do so? Well, in various ways, but not with specific instructions, and for good reason. So we don't have specific instructions. On the website of the convention, be patient. This is the way that we are going to close this session, this 2-hour session. We are going a little bit to navigate through that with good practices and examples. We can find descriptions of inventorying exercises. You can also find the kit of the convention that I reassure you we are going to give to you. Unfortunately, it is translated in English. I am not sure that the regional center has started to translate the kit as it is in Bulgarian, but still the website of the regional center can give you perfect ideas and leeways, not only about the convention in general, but for inventories as well. You can find kind of a questionnaire, but to adapt in what you are doing, to tailor it according to your personal needs. And you can also find what we call the ethical principles. I save the whole conversation for Mrs. Ala Stankiewicz, who is going to be with you in the next days, to discuss it further, those ethical principles. We are just going to mention the one that has to do with inventories later on. I am going very quickly through that because I think that from what we've already said, we can all feel how it is important to build inventories, not only for the inventorying process and for the good of ICH, but because at the same time, and because the ICH inventories should be community built, it strengthens these bonds between the community. It gives a sense of identity, and of course, it contributes to the updating and good governance of the folk culture of its community. That's why they are not giving precise advice and descriptions and prescriptions in the UNESCO, because they believe strongly in each party's, particular ways of internal governance and particular ethical systems. And the only thing that says to us in every possible way the convention concerning also the inventories, it is that they should be built and developed with the free, prior, and informed consent of the community and the bearers. And of course, there are some restrictions. Finland can't come as Finland and make the inventory in Romania or Bulgaria or Greece, but under the hat of Finland, its national hat. It's another story if we cooperate with an NGO from that country. Every state party is responsible to make inventories or to tend or to facilitate the way that inventories should be done in its territory with a view to safeguarding, respecting what the communities say about the access, because you all know that there are rituals where the community ban the access to the outsiders. Maybe the naslедство is one such a case also in Bulgaria as is in Greece. You can't go through the whole process or all the time. So this is what we mean when we say respecting customary practices. Of course, another thing that says UNESCO is that the inventories should be regularly updated, and that's another basic difference compared to the academic research. In the academic research, we've documented once, we archived it, and it is there. But for the intangible cultural heritage, this is good in order to have comparisons and tendings. We in the intangible cultural heritage have to regularly go back and back to the communities every 2 years, every 3 years, to see in which extent things are as we've already documented them, or which changes do we observe. And of course, to report on the inventories and in consequent also on the state of the intangible cultural heritage. As I said, and maybe this is quite important for you, because I bet that among you there are people and individuals and organizations that would really like to go for nominations for the UNESCO lists. Is that right? Or are there people that have already documented cultural items that have been proposed for inscription in the lists? I don't know if someone wants to. It would be interesting if, for instance, I have someone from that would like also to give the testimony of how prepared a nomination for the UNESCO lists. If not, it's not a problem. Does someone of you have prepared a nomination for the living human treasures of Bulgaria or for the inventory of Bulgaria? I don't see quite an interaction. Okay, here we are. Denica. Mrs. Shivacheva. Is that right?
Здравейте, да, аз съм от Монтана. Участвала съм в комисията за определене на кандидатура за регионална листа от едно читалище в Монтана. Работили сме в комисията с представител на БАН и представител на регионалния музей. Не бяха вписани. Това е накратко.
Thank you. It's very interesting to know that among us there are people. Now I miss Miss Shusharova, and I am going to give her the floor. It's very interesting because maybe we can share experience.
Да, здравейте.
Okay.
Здравейте.
Miss Shusharova.
Искам да кажа, че ние сме представили кандидатура и стигнахме до регионален победител за област Пловдив, като дълго време събирахме, описвахме, документирахме, направихме филм и тази кандидатура беше свързана с един занаят работа с царевична шума. Изработване на сувенири, кукли, пана, постелки, предмети за бита. Това е един стар занаят, който е съществувал при нас. Всъщност не стигнахме до вписване в националната листа, но бяхме наградени като регионален победител и имаме представа как се прави това изследване. По-късно станахме победители в един национален конкурс "Чудесата на България" за нематериално културно наследство, който пък ни даде голям тласък и нашата школа за занаяти се представи на много места по света, включително и в централата на ЮНЕСКО в Париж.
Thank you indeed. Even though I had an unstable connection at that time, I took notes. So you have been through the inventorying process, and I believe that what we are now saying could really engineer you through how it should be done and can really make you save up time and effort. I am not going to follow the same range now of the slides, just to mention something. Once both of our colleagues mentioned that. They mentioned about regional work. One of the things that UNESCO doesn't say is it doesn't talk about a compulsory and obligatory national inventory. It talks about inventories in plural. And it leaves the possibility, it gives the possibility to every state party to work as it feels should and can work with multiple inventories. Yes, Iliana? You are muted and... Yes.
Извинявам се за прекъсването, понеже виждам, че в общия чат до всички пише госпожа Ваня Йорданова от музея в Смолян, която се извинява, че няма микрофон и камера, но тя пише, че тяхната кандидатура беше вписана в национална листа, представяше традиционно свирене на каба-гайда и изработване на каба-гайда. Така че имаме успешно вписване, пример за успешно вписване в националната листа от госпожа Ваня Йорданова от Смолян. Само това исках да добавя.
No, not at all. Don't even talk about it, Iliana. Actually, I have seen the chat, and as I've said you before, you can feel free to write simply either the interpreters, or as long as Iliana is going to be here, I would really appreciate if you can just take a look, because I'm sure that there are interesting things written there, and thanks a lot for translating, Iliana. So it is important to understand that it is not a need for only one inventory. Maybe the state party decides to have a national inventory. This is the case also in Bulgaria, this is the case in France, this is the case in... Iliana, do you want something else and I interrupt? Sorry.
Още комуникация в общия чат от музея в Етър се включват госпожа Павлина Дамянова, която пише, че от музей Етър имаме вписано живо човешко съкровище, занаят, мотавчийство. Госпожа Даниела Неделчева, която също се извинява, че без камера и микрофон, участва в подготовката на няколко кандидатури в област Разград и има вписани 4 елемента в националната представителна листа. Музея, госпожа Нина Димитрова обяснява за музея на занаятите, който също участвал с подготовка на 3 кандидатури, като една от тях е вписана. Ето това прекъсване беше от мен само за да споделя новата информация, която имаме в общия чат и оставям Панайота отново да продължи. Благодаря.
Thanks, my dear, and thanks all the colleagues contributing. So, coming back, because it is very important, and I think this is the time to mention it and to make it clear. When we are talking about inventory, ICH inventory, it's not in the singular. It can be either in the singular or in plural. And of course, it can take up, it can continue or modify already existing inventories. What I mean, you are very lucky to have the ethnological center in the Academy of Science, which is an extremely serious institution. Of course, the researchers there were carrying out researches and documentation for years, and at that time, as I've already told you, for archival reasons. Of course, we are going to be based and funded to those works, but the big difference, if you want, is this updating and community participatory dimensions that have the ICH inventory. And maybe this gives us the difficulty to cope with it, because it's something very new to work with the communities in equal terms. It comes soon, the discussion on that very specific subject. So we can have a national inventory, we can have regional inventories, we can have professional inventories, for instance, the Association of Embroiderers. We can have thematic inventories, traditional game inventories, national scale, but only traditional games. The thing is that it is need to be inscribed, so documented actually, an element with the participation of the community and regularly reported in order to fulfill also the criteria for inscription in the representative list and in the list of ICH in need of urgent safeguarding, all those prescribed in the operational directives. Please don't fear of all that information about operational directives, X guideline, overall result framework. Keep in mind what it is needed, because you are giving the arguments of good implementation of the convention. And I'm sure that if we keep this idea of participation of the community, multiple forms of inventories, constantly or regularly, constantly can't be done because it needs a lot of resources, not only in terms of money, but also in terms of natural presence of human resources, which is not always evident, but regularly updated in order to report back the viability or the risks or the dangers or the transformation of a cultural element. Because an inventory is a work in progress. Wait to go forth, voila. Nobody will tell the convention, or even the ministry will not tell you about the size of an inventory, the aim of an inventory. Okay, they are going to tell us the safeguarding, and this we should keep it in mind. Beside the resources, how we are going to find the way to establish the inventory, or the methods. You still have to work it in the spirit of the convention, which is not creating hierarchies between ICH elements. This we keep it in mind. When Mrs. Shusharova said that the corn leaves craft making was not inscribed finally, it doesn't mean that it is less important or less impressive or less symbolic or identity marking than another one that was inscribed. It is not the case, and we shouldn't categorize in that ways our intangible cultural heritage elements. You can have plenty, as I've said before, domains, not only the 5. You can have traditional games, you can have furniture making, not as a craftsmanship, but as itself. You can have any classification system. Keep in mind the community participation, the updating process, and the safeguarding view. And of course, it is meant to be with the aims of the convention, creating dialogue, respect, and understanding between communities. And feel free to use your own definitions. Here was the question of the existing inventories that we can really get inspired and include them in our working more regularly for the 2003 convention. And one such a case of a state, a very active besides state, that had documentation before the 2003 convention is Brazil. Already in the 1930s, the very important now, not only for Brazil, because you are going to tell me that Brazil is in the other side of the world, so completely different situation. Is not completely different situation, I'm reassuring you, because Brazil is a multi-ethnic state with a lot of communities, indigenous communities. So in a way, it is one of the, Latin America reminds me of the Southeastern Europe in the sense of every state's society is a mosaic society with a lot of different cultural, linguistic, religious, ethnic components. So in the very 30s, the Institute of Historic and Artistic Heritage, once it was established, it applied the tombamento for the protection of cultural heritage, but mostly based on the notions of authenticity and preservation in the original form, and focusing mostly on objects. I remind you that this was our idea about heritage even before 2003. Heritage was only something that could be beside the showcases of a museum or a church, a medieval Byzantine church, or an ancient temple, or a tomb, or a bridge, in the best case, to bring it also in a little bit more folklore, or an old traditional, in the traditional vernacular architecture village. And point, how to say, full stop. All those things after 2003 changed. They didn't close this system, the tombamento, but they recreated with a 3-step participatory inventory methodology, with the goal to maintain the country's cultural diversity in a context of homogenizing tendencies, so to have the social cohesion between different people, contribute through the implementation of the safeguarding mechanisms to this social inclusion. And the result is that since 2000, they have 48 inventories of cultural phenomena throughout the country. 48 concluded, and another 47 in progress. They have 16 cultural assets registered and 11 action plans. Do you observe something curious here? 48 inventories already done, 47 in progress, 16 registrations, 11 action plans. Would anybody like to comment that statistics? To save up time, I am just telling you that this proves that the aim is not the inscription or the registration. The aim is to inventory, and it is going to be registered. Even if we have only 16 cultural elements registered, we still are having a lot of inventory systems that work with society for their cultural phenomenon. Here are 2 indicative photos of how they are making the inventories with the participation of the community. So, of course, each state party should adopt measures to ensure the access to the intangible cultural heritage, to fund copies of the inventory for practitioners, to assist in creating local centers. And that's why I am telling you, in Bulgaria, you have a very expanded and well-resourced network that you can work with that. And now coming to what we call ethical and legal issues. I am going very, very quickly to that. And then I propose something like 5 minutes break just to have a glass of water. What is ethical and what is legal? It is something very broadly discussed in our societies, and there are issues that often overlap. often the laws are failing to protect or protect in an awkward way, and at that time, at that point, this is the ethical norm that pop out. To avoid all those complications, the convention talks about this well-known free, prior, and informed consent. We have to be honest and transparent and sensitive to the cultural behaviors of the community, not exploiting them morally, legally, and commercially. And at that point, we are acting ethically, and we are respecting the customary practices, the confidentiality, the rights. We acknowledge the communities. As I've told you before, those ethical principles that have been established lately after 2015 with the Valencia meeting, I think it was in 2016-17 that they were formed as a document. They have a special mention to community-based inventorying. Ethics is cultural specific, and this we have to keep it in mind. What is shocking, morally shocking us, maybe is not morally shocking a community in the mountains. And we should be very, very careful to the issues of the insider and the outsider and how to engage with the other. And the other very soft issue that really regards us is this data right issue. We have the community and the individual rights. How, to give you an example throughout that, when we go to a festivity, either as NGO representatives in order to record the traditional songs and music, we take permission. Often we have signed documents that we are going to take this material only for scientific and pedagogical use. When it comes to edit a CD, to whom you are going to pay the copyrights? This is one extremely important, dangerous, and difficult to answer question. We are trying to do systematic work through the World International Intellectual Property Organization, through the WIPO. And I am sure that this is a burning question to all of us. I would say again, in our region. 2 days ago, I went through a recording, a CD that was done in the 90s, traditional music from an island in the Central Aegean Sea. And at the back front, it was mentioned, all the songs recorded here are owned from the Greek people and the citizens of the island. What a nice way to overcome the copyright question. Is it legal? I would say not exactly. Would you be do you agree with me? It is a very soft point, this question with the copyrights. And just before breaking, I am just giving you And I advise you to go over there. It is very, very inspiring. A mention on the work that has been carried out in Australia. Australia is one of the countries that hasn't ratified the convention, that has serious problem with their indigenous population, the Aboriginals, but has done so serious work with the 2003 convention that really impresses me. They have perfect university studies and perfect research institutes. One such is the Institute for Aboriginal and Strait Islander Studies. If you go, excuse, now you are listening to the barking also of my dog. I hope she will. Excuse me, Kira. This is happening when we are working at home. As you see here, it is an extremely important issue, the ethical research, native title research, well-being of Aboriginals. So to show you that it is not something that is only in our minds. There are people actually working on that. I had this idea of just projecting this, but I'm not sure it is going to work. Nevertheless, you are going to receive it. I would propose, honestly, a 3-minute pause just to have a glass of water. So here we are now. It was just the time to have a glass of water, and we are going to attack for the last 35 minutes the methodology. I'm telling you that I am going to be very brief and just go through the different methods such as mapping, etc., and that we are just have to keep in mind that when we are talking about an element, we have to take into account in our inventorying process all those factors that are articulated circularly around it, and they are very nicely, it's a UNESCO slide, this one, that are articulated around the very basic elements. So the social, historical, environmental, political, and cultural life of the element, linking with the element with all those aspects. So the inventorying project is a step-by-step project, no universal or standardized. We have to determine the purpose of the inventory, to identify and involve the communities, to encourage the community members and facilitators to use their creativity, to build consultative mechanisms and trust with the community, to locate resources, natural, financial, and human ones, to identify, or if there are not, to create the structures for information gathering and networking, and to work with a view to disseminate, to update, and to access. Why I am telling all those things? Because if working with the communities for the inventory is a necessity and a very strong suggestion of the convention, it is not happening in a magical way. Let's be honest, we are all here representing institutions of, let's say, expertise. Either we work in a cultural organization, in a museum, in a città liste, in a folk group association. We are all there in title of expert. but we have to keep those things in mind, not to go with solid ideas, and to try to interact. I'm sure that all the people that have already either texted or talked have felt this as a stage of very hard work and very subtle work in a way. Here we are. So it is an emerging practice that uses techniques that we are going to go through it. Is an inventory made with the help and the participation of a community different to another inventory that it is drawn by experts? The answer is yes. The answer is yes, because first of all, a community-based inventory, it is a key step to establish the dialogue for ICH safeguarding. It has not immediate material benefits. Most of the people, when they are going to listen about making an inventory, are going to ask, and what shall I earn as a community? Actually, it is not a question of money earning or financial benefit direct. The participation and the motivation of the community, though, can bring some income activities exactly through the realization that the things that are inventoried can be quite interesting, important to show, to share, to attract people. And of course, for the community itself, it can be a way, the inventory, the process of inventorying, of touching some kind of financial support, either in national scale, in the national level, or even through the mechanisms of the international funding, because intangible cultural heritage, as we say, gives added value to any project. It can be an argument. It is not an end by itself. For the good or for the bad, being members of the European Union, we cannot touch important sums, important amounts of money from the International Cooperation Fund and Assistance Fund of the UNESCO. Nevertheless, cooperating in common inventorying projects with neighboring countries that are not members can give a leeway out of also financial support to our projects. Excuse me. So, an interesting thing is how we situate ourselves as experts. We are co-facilitators. We are not the ones that are going to drive the procedure of the inventorying. We assist the communities. We are not obliging the communities. We have to include all the members of the community. Still, we are the outsiders, and we have to remember that, to keep that in mind, and try and share people's mind, community's mind, in order to become more than informants, to take initiatives for the inventory. We have, as I've told you, to include marginalized communities or groups, migrant communities, user groups, women, youngsters, people with moving disabilities, in order to be as diverse, transparent, and flexible. This was the case with the inventory in Estonia. The community members worked together with specialists to manage inventory project after an initial consultation with the national working group. So we had community organizations, schools that got involved, and they managed an ICH database that was initiated by the central state agency, the ministry. And then they decided to inventory traditional knitted and woven products, which is quite a tradition in Estonia, and not only, I would say. But not only the skills to create traditional products, but the skills to use old techniques for new products. Another community-based inventory making is the Canada one in the states of Newfoundland and Labrador. Important tip, as I've told you beforehand for Australia, Canada as well hasn't ratified the convention. Still, they took the idea of the inventory as a safeguarding measure. They got inspired and they launched with the help of a university, a perfect ongoing and very, very modern inventory. Still, you have the bargains. So just give me one more. I have also noted you here the link of the inventory, and I've chosen just to show you, because sometimes when we are talking about intangible cultural heritage, ICH, folk culture, living heritage, we are having in mind only rituals, the 5 domains that I've described you. And what we have here, they conducted communities of youngsters and they inventoried the skateboarding. And how they inventoried the skateboarding, especially through apps in mobile phones. It was the youngsters that did that, and they actually made films of themselves. I mention it here as a quite inspiring case study to go in depth and to see that when we are talking about living heritage, which is an alternate term of intangible cultural heritage, we are opening a lot the spectrum. And we are also can talk about urban cultures, urban customs. I don't know if it's the case in Bulgaria, but especially in big cities in Greece, I have the experience of Athens, we have what we call new customs. So how we are trying to enact traditional customs within the urban framework. One such a case is going to come at the end of June. I'm not talking about rock festivals or something, not at all. I am talking about, for instance, the fires of St. John at the end of June. Surprisingly, the last 15, 18 years in various neighborhoods of the center of Athens, of the very, very urban, not in the suburbs, you can see not the neighborhood, but the youngsters coming until the age of 30, from 15 to 30, coming from different neighborhoods, celebrating St. John's fires with bagpipes in the very center of the city. It has been revitalized when it extincted after the Second World War in Athens. It has been revitalized, but without any mediation of associations or anything. I think it could be something deserving to be inscribed in the Greek inventory that I wanted to comment to you now. The case of the Greek national ICH inventory, it is very characteristic. When it was first initiated in 2008, it was driven by the Ministry of Culture. I had the honor and the, the joy to be there in the very first steps of the inventory. But at that time, the inventory was driven from us working in the ministry, the ethnologists of the ministry. I still remember how we documented the Mediterranean diet and the cultivation of the mastic small tree. But since 2013, and after, it's an ongoing project, we started organizing raising awareness days in different regions of Greece with the participation of local authorities and communities. And once we've launched online the inventory, all of a sudden, communities started to propose to us. We had also a form. We developed a form following more or less the fields of the nomination forms that you can find in the UNESCO website. And the communities by themselves, they started through associations, through their municipalities, they started to propose, but I'm talking to you with a stormy rhythm, they started to propose inscriptions. By all means, not of everything could be inscribed, or not everything could be inscribed in the first row. We concluded by sending them remarks, asking them to amend certain things, to change. And we initiated a procedure, a circle through the year, where we launch a call for submitting of intentional inscription, then the preparation and the submission of the inscription, but after a close work with the ministry. And lastly, from October to December of every year, the evaluation, which is done from the National Scientific Committee for Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage. Result, within less than 8 years, we have 83 community-driven inscription in the national inventory. I'm telling you now that I left the unit in the ministry that I've been working, and that they are now receiving all those proposals from time to time. Even if it is so passionate to work in the museum, I'm feeling a little bit jealous, because I know that this is something very, very fruitful. Here, just you all know, but I've put it though, which could be the documents for the inventory documentation, questionnaires, the free form for the community ideas, recording sheets, numbering indexing systems, forms very important for free, prior, and informed consent. And of course, we should take notice to have access to those materials in local language, to avoid jargon, to create with community members. And not to forget documentation for future use. It is very important, as I've told you, to form our team with multiple perspectives and roles and skills. So we have the experts who could be NGO representatives, ethnologists, museum specialists, facilitators, to support the community, and of course the community representatives to enable inclusivity and to balance into multiple methods, either as practitioners or as patrons and audiences. We have to define our objectives. What are the expectations of the community and the workshop participants regarding the fieldwork practicum? What are the expected goals? What are the expected outcomes? And what is our field? It is a village, a neighborhood, a district, a community, an occupational professional group. It is about a performance. It is about a festivity. We have to be very clear before starting. And of course, to establish contacts and trust environment and what we call this interactive rapport between the insiders and the outsiders, to be very, very careful about who represents the community in our initial contact with it. And once being there, to become familiar with the community surroundings with very obvious ways, in a way, such as walks or drives with local people, participation in daily activities, listening to conversation in public places, staying overnight to listen to histories or folk tales. I'm sure that most of you have already done and carried out such activities, either are as academics or as stakeholders representing various organizations. And now I am just encountering the methods of information generation, production of information, before going through them a little bit more explicitly in the time that we have in our webinar. So interviews, like a good conversation, we have to define if it's going to be between 2 or more people or focus group. We have to decide if it is going to be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured. We have to define the preliminary questions. We have to choose the location to make the interview, consulting of course the community, and keeping in mind that when we talk about an interview and not a direct audio recording, we have to reassure a place free of distractions and background voices, easily accessible and comfortable for the interviewee, and to reassure the right equipment. That's why I've told you beforehand that now we enter into more technical details, and that if in what has to do with conversational interviews, either structured or semi-structured, we are all experienced. Nevertheless, I'm not sure that it's happening the same way in what has to do with audio recording or participatory video or even photography. Talking from a personal point of view, I just shoot and making video that will help me analyze, but they are not the ethnographic videos that should accompany as parallel material the documentation. For that, we need the expert, and this is the visual anthropologist. It is completely different. I worked 2 weeks ago to shoot, to documentate the celebration in the church of the Holy Friday. And I was there with a not filmmaker, with a person using the with a cameraman actually. Okay, he was very sensitive, he was very cooperative, but he had zero experience in ethnographic shooting. I was lucky enough to have someone who was very kind. If not, it would have been a disaster. So we have to reassure the human resources for expertise, especially in these technical parameters. I have just put you here to have them quite balanced and codified, the advantages and disadvantages of the structured interviews and semi-structured interviews. And when we say that, I hope that we all understand that the structured interview is the one which proceeds, that we proceed with a structured questionnaire, and that we are trying to stay within the limits that we have already defined, whereas the semi-structured balances between what we have prescribed and what the interviewee wishes to say, respecting the deviation of the conversation and believing deeply that the slightest detail can be extracted out of the most apparently irrelevant comment. And of course, we have the unstructured interviews, where we, this is the quite postmodern technique, where we leave our interlocutors, and it is better to address them and to conceive them as interlocutors and not interviewees, in order to avoid hierarchies and to stay as long as possible close to the idea of engaging the community in the maximum. You can see here that one of the disadvantages is that you can easily get off track, but what does it mean, get off track? What does it mean it is time consuming? What does it mean it requires transcription? It means that it is vivid. It is not in vitro. It is not orientated. And we need to carry out non-orientated and not how to say, pre-constructed discussions, conversations, in order also to gather all the required information coming from all those different aspects that build the element identity. And of course, we have good questions and less good. Just for economy here, I mentioned them, bad questions. And I always personally advise for open-ended questions, questions that can't be answered with a yes or no, because they help us to avoid embarrassment of silence. They are kicking off for further conversation, and they provide varied information from where we can extract the more specific. And of course, neutral phrasing, paraphrasing in order to use, to show understanding. We should avoid to lead the conversation, to lead the, to force answers. And at the same time, this is the hard task of the interviewer, that you have at the same time that the interview is happening, to keep an overview in order to verify that you have the maximum of the information of the data that you thought you could have or that you think you need. Sometimes being an active listener not only shows interaction with the interlocutor, but also, how to say, encourages the interlocutor to go in depth even without any question. So you have to keep an eye on him, to respond all the time, to be quite open-minded in order not to try to bring him back, but to leave him express himself openly, not to interrupt, and to acknowledge him timely, and even with non-verbal cues. It is very practical to use focus groups, but it's not always evident. When I say focus group, to try and not have an open community interview, but only dancers, only potters. It is always much more fruitful to have a multiple group, be more, how to say, to gather as much and as diverse data as possible. And of course, we have the photography of people, places, events. And also keep in mind that we have for the inventory and to show for the ICH inventory and to show the transformation through time and the living heritage, the living aspect of the element, also to look for archival as well as the actual photographs. A method that it is very, very fruitful to encourage the community to participate is what they call photo voice. I don't know if you are aware. Not only it provides an outlet for inventorying intangible cultural heritage as the community members are taught a new skill, how to take photographs, but at the same time, you can use this methodology when you have community members commenting on photo material. And of course, a lot of techniques that maybe without understanding we are using, such as how we center our theme, how close we are shooting, the role of, of thirds, horizontal and vertical, in order to focus and see where we put our center of interest. The participatory video also is an extremely interesting, important, cost-effective, widespread means now that the technology is accessible even in the most remote, let's say, area. And in most of the cases, it gives very interesting fruits because it involves the community in filmmaking. It is also a tool and a method and a result, if you like. And I have also put you some of the methods and mostly to compare the short video films and the ongoing video recording. As you can understand, it is very fruitful, the ongoing video recording, because it's much more polyphonic, it records in context, it gives importance in processes. the audio recording can be multi-used in various ways as well. Nevertheless, here we also have a technological part that is not evident, that can be treated by all the community members, but also by all the outsiders, all the other stakeholders. I mean, an ethnologist is not guaranteed, is not for granted, that is someone who knows how to choose microphones or the microphone positioning. So we are just coming back once again in the story of the expert. We have also the participatory audio recording. I am skipping because I'm also watching the watch, and I want to conclude with the as I've promised you, with the ICH website. We have the participatory mapping, very important, and maybe a little bit old-fashioned, either the ground or the sketch one, but idea stimulating and community gathering. Map legends, of course, when we are dealing with rituals enacted, especially in nature, it is inevitable that apart from the geographical map, we also have a legendary map that is in parallel built. Of course, the pros and the cons. And needless to say that we have to be very careful before leaving the field work in order to verify what we've gathered, in order to fulfill eventual gaps, and in order to store all the cataloged items that we have found. Some ideas of what can we do with the inventory inscriptions, from publications, printed or electronic, to broadcasting, and of course to internet and social media, various possibilities and ideas. Never forget that the community that creates the community has to also have access. When experts, together with practitioners, documented in the inventory songs and stories from Uganda, they put the text in the local dialect with music notation for everybody, so the Western type, translated in English, but to be pronounced here. So here we have the other way around. We gave the first role in the dialect because it is a community fruit, but at the same time, you, I, our children, as foreigners to the state, to the national framework in Uganda, they can have at least access in English through translation. And now, getting into inspiration, I'm sure that we could talk about ages, and it is passionate, and that's why in my report I am going to propose honestly something like a summer school for inventorying processes, so as for all to get instructed also in technical methods that it's not evident. Once we don't have the possibility of a fieldwork practicum, of a field trip, let's get into inspiration by diving into the UNESCO website. And where can we find ideas? Most of the time, we think that we have to find a special field named inventory. This is not the case, as I've told you. No clear instructions, not an exemplary form, not how to say, not a recipe to follow. It is a cake that anybody makes in its own way. Remember to put flour, sugar, and butter, but in your own proportions. Nevertheless, and the inventories have been also a question of proposal as is, as systems, as they are, of inscription in the lists. So when you see, this is the first page, okay? You go to the lists and then you find a small, another field, browse the lists. As you've learned, we have the representative, the list of urgent safeguarding, and the register of best practices. You can filter with relevant keywords, inventory, identification, documentation, and get inspired either by inventory forms indicated compulsory non-nomination forms of the inscribed items, or by inventory programs inscribed as good practices. When I say the inventory forms, when a country wants to inscribe an element, they are obliged to give full information about the inventory and to write it down in a form, and to give also the link, because it has to be also digital and online accessible, the link. Imagine how many ideas you have and you can take by visiting. It is all in English, accessible, the inscription files. So you can take ideas from there. But apart from that, and I found, I think, something like 10 or 12 examples, and I've chosen to close like that this meeting, this webinar, 3 of them. I found also inventory systems, inventory ways inscribed in the register of good safeguarding practices. The first one is one of the most recent. It is inscribed as inventory methodology for inventorying intangible cultural heritage in biosphere reserves. So intangible cultural heritage plus nature, extremely interesting and dynamic. The experience of Mont-Cenis, Spain, inscribed in 2013. And you can also see an inscription of 2021, once again in the register of good safeguarding practices, coming from Kenya. Its name is Success Story of Promoting Traditional Foods and Safeguarding Traditional Food Ways. But one of the most important activities of this promotional and safeguarding practice was the inventory making. And lastly, the call for register for projects of the National Program of Intangible Cultural Heritage in Brazil, the one that I've already mentioned to you. It was proposed and inscribed as a system of calling for projects. Having chosen a photo of a ritual, a custom happening in northern Greece, in the region of Kozani, not very far from the Greek-Bulgarian borders, in 1 week before Easter. They are called Lazarines, from Lazar, because it's the Saturday before Easter. And I know that you also have a similar custom, and we had exchange this year, a group of girls from Bulgaria. Unfortunately, I don't remember the name, and I didn't have the time to have the photo, but I am going to put it on you for this very final slide. Came in near Salonika to the Ethnographic Museum of Masks, and they were, because it's kind of mixture of populations, and we have a firewalking refugee community there, so they are exchanging visits, and they came, the Lazarines, from I don't recall the village now. Nevertheless, thanks a lot for your attention. And now, if you have the courage, I am here to answer any questions or to listen any proposals at your disposal.